When we're talking about advancing Métis rights, it's really important that any government seeking to represent those rights have an objectively verifiable registry. And I think the Métis Nation of Ontario has proven beyond any doubt whatsoever that we have an objectively verifiable, solid, professional registry that is providing absolute 21st century support to our citizens.
Métis self-government has its origin in the historic Métis communities in Ontario. Our communities have long been self-governing based on Métis laws, traditions, customs, and kinship. We have an inherent right to self-government as an Indigenous people. It is the notion of formally recognized Métis self-government by other orders of government that is new. Our journey to this formal recognition began in 1993 with the establishment of the Métis Nation of Ontario and our registry in 1994, which was created to register all Métis citizens in Ontario. 1993 was also the year that Métis father-son Steve and Roddy Powley were charged with unlawful hunting in Sault Ste. Marie. These charges incited a 10-year court battle focused on whether Métis had a constitutional right to hunt for food. The case reached the Supreme Court of Canada, and on September 19, 2003, the court affirmed what Métis had already known, that they had a constitutional right to harvest.
It was the watershed decision to prove Métis rights in Canada. And in fact, to this day, it remains the test. If you're going out to assert your rights under Section 35, it is the Powley test that you will be held to. It also, the Powley community, our Sault Ste. Marie community here in Ontario, is actually the only Métis community in Canada that has been recognized by the Supreme Court of Canada as having Section 35 rights. That decision was an absolute watershed moment in the history of our people, and it was the moment when government could no longer deny, essentially, who we are as Métis and deny the rights that we carry as one of Canada's Indigenous peoples. And in fact, everyone's canoe has floated with that victory in that it finally meant recognition for Métis rights, and it ultimately has led to formal recognition of our Métis governments.
In 2004, the Métis Nation of Ontario and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry entered into an agreement that recognized, on an interim basis, a limited number of Métis Nation of Ontario harvesters cards until an independent evaluation of the system could be performed. This began a long process of research by the MNO to identify the historic Métis families of the MNO.
The work of the verified Métis family lines and the historic research had been ongoing for, two and almost 3 decades at this point. Métis Nation of Ontario, in the statement of prime purpose, it gives us direction to document and publish the history of our communities and to establish that registry as a verifiable registry that shows who our citizens are, who our people are, where our communities are.
It took years and tens of thousands of hours of research to identify exactly who made up these communities. In 2017, the Métis Nation of Ontario released the first 88 verified Métis family lines. These family histories detailed the history and kinship networks of Métis in Ontario. Although their history was already familiar to Métis, this was the first time such a detailed history had been written down. Meticulously researched and fully supported by the archival record, the work has become the definitive written record of Métis in Ontario.
The verified Métis family line process, everything that was put together as part of that process was vetted by a completely independent third party who had no stake in the outcome, and the finding was a 100% success rate. Thousands upon thousands of individual documents, and not one error was found in all of that. That verified Métis family line process had been ongoing for several years and did a superb job at telling the history of those communities, the history of these families that make up these communities, that make up the Métis Nation in Ontario. And the next step, and what was undertaken by PCMNO in the RSRP process, is getting clarity then on how do our communities today connect to that historic research.
one of the fundamental things that a nation of people do, that a government does, is provide clarity on who it represents, who it speaks for, whose interests it is advocating on behalf of. And that's why that registry review process was so important.
This review, the Registry Self-Government Readiness Project, or RSRP, involved a review of the Métis Nation of Ontario's registry to determine whether and to what extent MNO Registry files satisfied the current requirements for MNO citizenship as outlined in the MNO Registry policy. Specifically, this policy outlined 4 criteria that individuals applying for MNO citizenship must meet: self-identification as Métis, proof of historic Métis Nation ancestry, distinct from other Aboriginal peoples, and accepted by the Métis Nation. Upon review, each file was designated as either complete, missing documentation, or incomplete. As part of the RSRP, No History staff reviewed every single piece of paper in more than 20,000 files. Each file was digitized and then carefully reviewed to determine if it met the 4 criteria.
We developed a state-of-the-art database. It's the SASH database, and it's the MNO's registry database. Each person is in there under their own discrete profile. It has their demographic information, maybe information about if they're a harvester, it has their harvester application, their photo, but it also has genealogical documents and it has their lineage. So in this new database that the MNO has developed, if your profile is in there and you have your lineage built out and your child wants to apply, then they only need to link to you and it's already all built out. It's amazing.
Quality assurance was a key practice from the beginning of the process, with each file reviewed multiple times by different qualified reviewers.
And not only does the file get reviewed by somebody who's an expert in that area, but then the person builds out the lineage, they put everything in the file, and then it goes to quality assurance. And someone checks every single linking document. They check the whole citizen file just to make sure that nothing was missed. We're organized, we're digitized, we have these great tools, so it just allows us to work more efficiently with more clarity and multiple people working on the project at the same time and with the system we have.
The RSRP revealed that as of January 31st, 2021, 18,476 MNO citizen files demonstrate connections to Métis ancestors. Work on the registry continues. Since 2019, nearly 7,000 new applications have been processed, and the years-long backlog was completed. The RSRP process revealed some key insights into the Métis population in Ontario. Of citizens with complete files, more than 12,000 citizens traced to Métis ancestors in Ontario. Another 4,000 of the Métis Nation of Ontario's citizens traced to Métis ancestors in other parts of the Métis Nation homeland. Because of the detailed research and database, the Métis Nation of Ontario was also able to determine that citizens in Ontario didn't only trace to one ancestor that was Métis. Instead, it became clear that many had multiple ancestors that were Métis, living in different parts of the homeland and in other historic communities in Ontario.
When the Métis in Ontario came together in 1993 and formed the Métis Nation of Ontario, they formed it under one banner. They formed it with one registry representing all Métis Nation citizens here in Ontario. And over the course of that last 27 plus years, that registry really has been the heart of the Métis Nation of Ontario. We have grown remarkably over the course of that period of time. And as part of that ongoing commitment to transparency and accountability, we stand behind that registry. Our citizens stand behind that registry, and they have provided the documentation in order to support their files. And those files, they tell a story of Métis here in Ontario. Whether you trace to Ontario historic communities, or you trace your ancestry to the west, or maybe you trace your ancestry to both historic Ontario communities as well as to the west.
It gives us clarity when we're talking amongst ourselves about, who we represent, where we represent them, how we represent them. It gives us clarity when we're talking to Ontario about things like harvesting rights. It gives us clarity when we're talking to Canada about things like self-government and that inherent right to self-determination.
The Métis Nation of Ontario Registry is the heart of the Métis Nation in Ontario. It has evolved in the decades since its creation. Once housed in the attic of the Métis Nation of Ontario founders, it has become the largest collection of genealogical information on Ontario Métis. It is the most advanced Indigenous-owned registry in Canada and houses not only our citizenship data, but our history. And it is not complete. It can be added to, interpreted, and curated for generations to come.
All of that research that we've done, it just confirms what our people already knew. We had strong, vibrant Métis communities here in Ontario that were recognized as distinct Métis communities that had their own strong customs practice traditions, that had those strong kinship connections that existed here in Ontario and that continue to exist to this day. So that registry review, the verified Métis family lines, the Root Ancestor Project, the recognition of the 7 Ontario historic communities, all of that fits together to tell that story that we knew was there, that now we can share with the world.